I still remember the exact moment I realized I had been writing checks to fund my own betrayal. It was 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday when I found the receipt for a diamond necklace worth more than my car, bought with the credit card I had given him for emergencies. The same necklace I later saw sparkling around another woman's neck in his Instagram story. My name is Micah Harrison, and for 3 years, I convinced myself that love meant sacrificing everything while receiving nothing in return. I believed that if I just gave enough, loved enough, sacrificed enough, he would finally see my worth and choose me the way I had chosen him. But love isn't supposed to leave you bankrupt, both financially and emotionally. I met David Chen during my senior year of college at a coffee shop near campus. He was everything I thought I wanted: charming, ambitious, confident in a way that made me feel special. I was a practical business major with a part-time job at an accounting firm. He was studying film, full of big dreams about making it in Hollywood. The first 6 months were magical. David was attentive, romantic, and full of grand gestures. But even then, there were warning signs I chose to ignore. He had a way of making his problems, his emergencies, my responsibilities. When his laptop broke during finals, I offered mine. When he ran out of grocery money, I started sharing my meal plan without him asking. I told myself this was what couples did for each other. What I didn't realize was that I was setting a precedent, teaching him that my resources were his resources, but never the other way around. After graduation, I got a job at a prestigious accounting firm. David moved in with me, and I supported both of us while he worked on his film projects. I paid everything: rent, groceries, utilities, even spending money. He promised it was temporary, just until his big break. I believed him because I wanted to. I thought I was investing in our future, like my mother had supported my father through medical school. David was initially grateful, cooking dinner and telling me about his screenplay progress. But gradually, his gratitude became entitlement. He stopped asking to use my credit card and just took it. Instead of thanking me, he complained that our apartment was too small or we needed better equipment. When I got promoted, David's reaction wasn't celebration but expectation. Now I could afford to rent him a proper workspace, buy professional equipment, fund his film courses that cost thousands of dollars. The emotional manipulation was subtle but devastating. David made me feel guilty for any hesitation about his requests. If I questioned expenses, he'd remind me of his sacrifices for art. If I suggested a part-time job, he'd get hurt and distant, making me feel like I didn't understand his vision. He was expert at making me feel like the villain in money conversations. When I'd discuss our budget or express concern about debt, he'd turn it around. "I thought you believed in me," or "maybe you should find someone who meets your financial expectations." These conversations always ended with me apologizing and agreeing to whatever he'd asked for, just to prove I wasn't shallow or unsupportive. The isolation happened gradually. David made my friendship seem less important than our relationship. When friends invited me out, he'd get moody about being alone all day while I worked. He never explicitly forbade me from seeing them, but made it emotionally taxing enough that staying home became easier. My world became smaller until it revolved entirely around David and his needs. I measured my worth by his happiness, and his happiness depended entirely on what I could provide. After 2 years, my savings were depleted. I had taken cash advances on credit cards for his equipment and courses. I borrowed money from my parents under false pretenses, claiming it was for my professional development when it really funded David's projects. I started freelance bookkeeping evenings and weekends, working myself to exhaustion. The physical toll was visible: weight loss from anxiety, insomnia from financial stress, panic attacks at work thinking about our mounting debt. My job performance suffered while my colleagues bought homes and built savings. The breaking point came when David announced he'd been accepted to a prestigious film residency in Los Angeles. 6 months, unpaid, needing $15,000 for expenses. I didn't have $15,000. I had negative money from supporting his previous ventures. But David spoke about it like a done deal. "This is it, Micah. The opportunity I've worked toward for years. The connections, the experience it's going to open every door for us." I should have said no. Instead, I took a personal loan, a second mortgage on my condo, liquidated my retirement account with massive penalties, and borrowed from friends and family. I sacrificed everything to make his dream possible while he walked away from me to pursue it. For the first month, we talked nightly about his experiences. but gradually, calls became infrequent. He was busy networking, attending screenings, living the life he'd always dreamed of while I worked overtime to pay for it. During the 4th month, I noticed changes in his social media. Photos of parties I hadn't heard about, references to people I didn't know. When I saw a photo of him at a fancy restaurant with a woman named Sophia, something in his voice sounded evasive when I asked about it. I started checking obsessively, finding more evidence of a social life that excluded me entirely. Expensive dinners, weekend trips, a lifestyle funded by my sacrifice. Sophia appeared more frequently tall, glamorous, connected in the film industry, everything I wasn't. When I confronted him about Sophia, David got angry like I'd never seen. He accused me of being paranoid and controlling, of not trusting him, of trying to sabotage his career with jealousy. I apologized immediately, hating myself for questioning him, but unable to shake the feeling that everything had changed. The evidence kept mounting. Unexplained charges on the credit card I'd given him for emergency expensive dinners, designer clothes, jewelry. When I asked, he always had explanations that felt hollow but were technically plausible. During his final month, I was working late when my phone buzzed with an Instagram notification. David had posted a photo from what looked like an engagement party. He was standing next to Sophia, both beaming, her left hand prominently displayed with a diamond ring I immediately recognized from a credit card statement I'd questioned months earlier. The caption read, "She said yes. I can't wait to start this new chapter with the love of my life. Thank you to everyone who has supported us on this journey." I stared at the phone, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The diamond ring I had unknowingly purchased was sparkling on another woman's finger. The man I had sacrificed everything for was starting a new life with someone else. The future I had funded was a future that didn't include me. I called him immediately, hands shaking. When he answered, his voice was guarded, as if expecting this call. "Mika, I can explain," he said before I could speak. "Explain what exactly? Explain how you got engaged to another woman while I was paying for your life?" After a long pause, his voice was cold, almost cruel. "Look, Micah, what we had was great, but it was never going to last. You had to know that. We're from different worlds, and now that I'm finally living in mine, it's obvious you don't belong here. Sophia understands my work, my ambitions, my world. She's not trying to hold me back." "Hold you back? I've given you everything I had and more. I've sacrificed my own dreams, my financial security, everything for you. And I appreciate that," he said, as if discussing a business transaction. "You helped me get to where I needed to be. But now I'm here, and I need to be with someone who belongs in this world with me. You'll find someone more suited to your lifestyle." The dismissal in his voice was more devastating than the betrayal itself. I realized I had never been a partner to him, never someone he loved or respected. I had been a resource, a means to an end, someone to use until something better came along. What about the money? The loans, the debt, the sacrifices I made? That was your choice. No one forced you to do any of that. You made those decisions because you wanted to. That's not my responsibility. After hanging up, I sat in my empty apartment, surrounded by evidence of 3 years of devastation. Secondhand furniture bought while funding his equipment. Stacks of bills I couldn't pay. The silence where friends and family should have been. For the first time in years, I saw my situation clearly. I saw how completely I'd been manipulated, isolated, used. The man I'd loved, the future I'd sacrificed for, the narrative I'd built my identity around, none of it had been real. The next few days were the darkest of my life. I went through every financial statement, adding up the total cost of my delusion. Over $60,000 in debt, not counting lost equity and retirement savings. But worse than financial devastation was emotional reckoning. I had to face that I'd willingly participated in my own destruction, ignored red flags, dismissed my instincts, silenced my voice for a fantasy that was never real. The shame was overwhelming. How could I have been so naive, so blind, so desperate for love that I confused abuse with affection? But somewhere in that despair, anger emerged. Pure, righteous anger at the years lost, money wasted, person I'd allowed myself to become. That anger became fuel for my first recovery steps. I called everyone I owed money to, told my parents the truth, reached out to college friends I'd abandoned. The conversations were humiliating but liberating. For the first time in years, I was telling the truth instead of maintaining a facade. I also called a therapist. In our first session, she asked, "When was the last time you made a decision based on what you wanted instead of what you thought would make David happy?" I couldn't answer, because I couldn't remember. I'd been living someone else's life so long I'd lost touch with my own desires, values, dreams. The financial recovery was brutal but straightforward. Every freelance project available, 7 days a week for months. I sold everything valuable, moved to a smaller apartment, cut every unnecessary expense. I consolidated debt and negotiated payment plans. The emotional recovery was more complex. In therapy, I learned how I'd been groomed for this relationship from childhood, taught that my worth was tied to how much I could do for others, how little I needed, how selfless I could be. I learned about manipulation cycles, financial abuse, and that healing was possible. The hardest part was learning to trust my judgment again. David had trained me to doubt myself so thoroughly I couldn't distinguish between intuition and paranoia. Slowly, with therapy and support from friends and family, I began rebuilding my sense of self. 2 years after David's betrayal, I received an unexpected call from Sophia. She wanted to meet, and something in her voice made me agree. When we met for coffee, I was shocked. The glamorous woman from David's photos was gone, replaced by someone who looked exhausted and defeated exactly like I had during my worst days with David. "Did David ever ask you for money?" she asked. "For his projects, equipment, living expenses?" I nearly laughed. He asked for everything. I funded his entire life for 3 years. "Why?" Her face crumpled. David had done to her exactly what he'd done to me. The engagement was his way of securing new funding, a new person to manipulate. Sophia had discovered financial irregularities, evidence he was already cultivating his next victim. "I thought I was different," she whispered. "I thought he really loved me." We spent 2 hours comparing notes, recognizing patterns. By the end, she decided to leave David, and I'd gained new perspective. I hadn't been a victim because I was weak or stupid. I'd been targeted because I was strong, successful, and generous. David saw those qualities as resources to exploit, not virtues to cherish. That conversation marked a turning point. I stopped feeling ashamed and started feeling proud of what I'd survived. Today, 5 years later, my life looks completely different. I paid off the last debt 18 months ago, bought a new home, built up savings, and advanced significantly in my career. I'm in a healthy relationship with someone who treats me as an equal partner, who contributes as much as he receives. More importantly, I've rebuilt my relationship with myself. I know who I am now, what I want, what I'll accept, and what I won't. I have strong friendships, close family relationships, and still see my therapist monthly. I volunteer with organizations helping women escape financial abuse, sharing my story to help others recognize warning signs I missed. The most surprising thing is that I don't regret the experience anymore. It was devastating, but it taught me lessons I couldn't have learned otherwise. I learned I'm stronger than I imagined, that I can survive betrayal and come out better. I learned love isn't sacrifice, partnership isn't one-sided support, and my worth isn't determined by how much I can give someone else. The woman who wrote that last check to fund David's new life is gone. In her place is someone who knows her value, protects her interests, chooses love that lifts her up. It took losing everything to discover I'd never lost the most important thing, myself. I'd only forgotten who I was for a while, and now I remember. Sometimes people ask if I'd change things, avoid David altogether. The answer is complicated. I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone, and the cost was enormous. But without it, I might have spent my whole life in smaller versions of the same dynamic, never learning to value myself properly, never understanding what healthy love actually looks like. The last check I wrote to support David's dreams was the most expensive purchase I ever made, but also the most valuable. It bought me knowledge that I deserved better, strength to demand it, and wisdom to recognize it when I found it. In the end, that was worth every penny.